Well, in a very happy new year to you all. Let's begin with our first question, arising from the other videos we've done, really. Lots of comments coming in now. Thank you very much for those. First one comes from Caribou Sani, great name. Keep saying that, but yeah, very cool. When is Formula One going to consider including Africa in its schedule? Well, of course, Africa has been in Formula One schedule over the years. Famously, it staged the South African Grand Prix, Kyalami, and East London, actually, on January the 1st for a number of years. And that was where Formula One was. New Year's Day was the South African Grand Prix. And then we had many races in Kyalami, of course, particularly March, and built up to that, lots of tyre testing. They were the days. And I can remember tyre testing at Kyalami. It must have been for at least a week, and then going down to Cape Town afterwards. With my friend Brian Sims, actually, this is when we had with Honda engines, and hung around in Cape Town for a while, looked at a few of the old racetracks there as well. But Kyalami was just a fabulous circuit in its old rendition and in its newer one, which was in the early 90s when we were there, and Nigel was so brilliant in the 14. Anyway, when are we going back to Africa? That's the question. Well, it's purely a question of money, sadly. I think you're seeing today a Formula One that is very different from anything we've known so far. It's still spending a massive amount of money in order even to exist and to travel around the world. But there's much less direct sponsorship going into the teams now, much less money from outside sponsors going to the teams, because they don't give the same value for money on TV as they used to. And that's because a lot of the television coverage is now pay per view or pay TV and not free to air. So the actual viewing figures are much less proportional to the sponsorship market. And therefore it's very difficult for the teams to go out and get percentage wise to generate the same sort of money. So how is Formula One financing itself? It's financing itself, vicious circle coming up with pay TV contracts, and also putting on more races in countries that will pay enough to give the Formula One industry a profit. And you can see how the championship has expanded into various regions of the world, obviously the Middle East being the classic example there, of extra money coming in from there. That basically is replacing the sponsorship money that used to come in for the teams. So sadly, in terms of a country like Africa, South Africa coming into the Formula One calendar again, it is purely a question of money and putting up as much money as we're seeing coming out of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, etc. So I think that's the answer to the question. I mean, I'd love to see a race in South Africa. I'd love to see more races in South America, Colombia, Argentina, racing mad. But it is a question of money. Anyway, let's hope in the future it happens, but thank you for that question. Next one from Craig Rethorn. Is Formula One heading down the same road as NASCAR and IndyCar with everyone driving the same? He actually said something other than the word car there, but I won't repeat it. It is kind of, isn't it? The latest Formula One regulations are more templated and more restrictive than anything we've ever seen in Formula One history. It is still possible, of course, for Adrian Newey to do something with the aero on the new Red Bull that perhaps somebody at Mercedes or Ferrari will not be doing. So in that sense, Formula One is still brilliant in terms of its technology, but in terms of being on the cutting edge of technology, which is the selling point it's the DNA of Formula One, it's getting to the point where we're thinking, in order to keep costs down, in order to try and make it more competitive in the midfield and the back of the grid, we've got to have all these restrictions. It is almost to the point where you're saying, well, why don't we just go to everybody in Dalara's or whatever it is? Of course, that is all a function too of, dare I say it, fan surveys. And as I said last time, if it meant very close racing, if having the same car for everybody, a Dallara, let's say, meant incredibly close racing with 27 passes per lap per race, would you want that? Would the fans say yes to that? I don't know. I think I'm a purist, obviously, so I want a Ferrari to be a Ferrari and a Red Bull to be a Red Bull and a Merc to be a Merc. But I do want there to be some creativity and I want there to be innovation. And obviously the jury's out at the moment as to how much innovation there will be within the confines of these new regulations. We'll just have to wait and see. What I hear on the grapevine is that there's one area, I think it's just ahead of the rear wheel, speaking aerodynamically now, where they've revised the rules a little bit based on comments that have come in from all the various teams, the engineers of the various teams. And that revision has opened it up slightly to the point where I think, and I hear on the grapevine, Adrian Newey is saying, well, it's not quite as bad as I thought it was. If we're going to do this, maybe we can, it's all to do with air blockage and stuff. But I did actually speak to somebody close to Liberty the other day about that, and they said, well, I don't know what that's all about, because basically the rules are the same and nothing's happened there that'll make it any easier to be innovative. So again, as I say, jury's out, we'll have to wait. I think the first car will probably be hitting the road around mid-February, 22 car. But as Craig Scarborough will point out, till the cows come home, we won't see the final renditions of what they're going to be racing until literally probably at the first race. There's going to be a lot of stuff on those cars or not on those early cars because that won't be relevant to what they're going to be running, because everybody's being, obviously, for obvious reasons, being very secretive. The other point I think should be made is that Mercedes have actually, not only did they not win the Drivers' Championship, but it was a double whammy in a way, because if you are the Constructors' Champion, you have the most penalty in terms of wind tunnel design time and CFD design. And this was all brought in to try and make it easier for the midfield and back of the grid teams to be competitive. So there's now a penalty system in terms of how much time you can spend in the tunnel. It's something like 10%, I think, if you win the championship, you've got 10% less time than the team at the back of the grid. It is a sliding scale. So Mercedes got that, but then they didn't win the Drivers' Championship. So that is, they've got to go into a new season with a completely new car. Admittedly, one they've been working on for quite a while, but nonetheless, a completely new car with 10% less wind tunnel time than Red Bull. And Red Bull won the Drivers' Championship. So, that would be, as I say, that's almost a double whammy in my book in terms of making life difficult for the likes of Lewis and George Russell. More on that as we go further into the year. Okay, next question. We need 30 cars on the grid to satisfy the level of talent out there. Sim drivers, rookies, older dudes like Alonso and Vettel, and women. Stephen Schuster. Thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Again, I've been banging on for quite a while about how this whole business of every team has to run 2 cars in every race. That was one of the barriers that Bernie and the constructors built up around them in the early 80s when they were creating this world of Formula One to try and make it difficult for anybody else to come in and have one of the grid slots. And I think that we're still living in that era now for no reason at all, because why wouldn't we allow, just for the promotion of the sport, why wouldn't we allow some teams, or any team if they want to run 3 cars in a Grand Prix with a local driver that would do a massive amount to promote Formula One in that country? Just as a very good example, US Grand Prix next year. Imagine if Mercedes ran a 3rd car for, I don't know, Logan Sargent, a good young American driver. It would actually do a massive amount for the race. So I think that needs to be looked at. The whole question of 30 cars on a grid, of course, given how wide the circuits are today and how much runoff area, etc. there's no reason at all why we couldn't have at least a 26 to 28 car grid. I'm not sure about 30 cars, particularly around Monaco, but let's assume on a standard super circuit, 28 cars would work for sure. The reason we don't have that is because the current teams don't want that in reality. They may well say they do, but in reality, what they don't want is new teams, extra teams coming into Formula One and making the slices of the cake smaller. That's the simple reason why we only have 20 cars out there. It's incredibly difficult for a new team to come in and take a place on the grid. It's not just a question of we want more talent, let's get some women drivers. It's not that question. The question is, how do we break in to Formula One, given all the restrictions and the rules that control the empire as it is? So that's, sadly, it all comes down to money. Yet again, money and power in this case, I think.